some of the situational questions by level and role, as I mentioned, a lot of the leveling is determined by how well you perform in these behavioral interviews. So with the entry level people, and when we say entry level, basically what we mean is that intern to about 3 years of experience. Like that's really what a lot of FANG companies consider entry level. So basically, like they're looking for people that are looking to learn and be curious, invent and simplify. And the reason why, like with Invent and Simplify, like you have a fresh set of eyes on things. Like it's one of those situations where I've seen it to where someone has been working on one problem for like years, and then someone who's like just seeing it for the first time, like, oh, have you tried this? And it actually works. Like those types of situations. Diving deep, just really seeking to understand things, deliver results. As I mentioned, is always going to be a big one for us. Making sure that we're getting done what needs to be done. Bias for action, that's going to be another one as well. Like just being able to really showcase how our decision making works in terms of like cutting those corners and trying to move fast, because speed is everything in business. Thinking big, thinking outside of the box. And then, of course, customer session is always going to be a core value no matter what level. So some of the questions to assess out of that. What's the last thing that you taught yourself? And that kind of falls under LNBC, also known as Learn and Be Curious. We try to like abbreviate a lot of this so that way we can have more space on the slide. But those are going to be some of the common questions that you see out of that one. Or walk me through a project where you had to solve a complex problem. And, with that one, like that's another thing that we kind of talk to you about too on here. With complex problems, like you really got to take in consideration like what's complex for a FANG company. What you think is complex is pretty much just a everyday thing. So the way that I kind of always framed it is like what's something that's technically difficult, and then also had a lot of people like involved with it. So like what's a project that was like technically challenging, but was still like cross-functional. So you have a lot of stakeholders involved, and there's a lot on the line with this. So those are like what I think about with complex problems, and that's really what a lot of FANG companies look at as complex problems. Because in most cases, there's a lot on the line. Like if they don't have a product launched or the services aren't quite where they need to be. Think about when AWS crashed and Netflix wasn't working and ESPN wasn't working. Like people were freaking out. So that's just kind of example of how like a small problem can have like a big impact. So you really got to think about things from their perspective to really line it up. With experienced engineers, that's going to be that 3+ years of experience. As I mentioned, like L6 is slightly different, but I'll kind of talk on that a little bit later. But for the 3+ years of experience, they're really looking for you to own a lot of the processes, be able to earn its trust by like talking through how you work cross-functionally to get things done. And also looking to disprove yourself. Like if you have, as I mentioned earlier, like leaders are right a lot. If you have an idea, being able to have someone challenge you on your idea and kind of like fill in some of those gaps and holes and really be more of a team player. Cause I think that's a really good way of collaboration as well. And of course, dive deep, disagree and commit. With an experienced engineer, like you're going to have more conflict than an entry level person, because like with someone who has more conflict, that's meaning like they're going to be more involved in like important decisions. They're going to have like a lot more heart to hearts. So just making sure we have some examples around that. I've seen a lot of people get down level, for those very reasons. So questions to assess over that. Tell me about a project where you collab with other teams to meet a goal. So just kind of talk about some of the issues that might come up with it. Talking about what you personally owned in that and the importance of it. Like the main thing they want to know is what would happen if you didn't do your job. What would happen if your team didn't do what they were supposed to do? And a lot of times I think as we work, we don't really think about the impact of our work. Like I think about recruiting, for example. In my mind, recruiting isn't a big deal. But on the flip side, it's kind of like, okay, if I don't recruit, then this company doesn't work. These products don't launch. Diversity, basically goes to the wayside. So it's important that I do my job, even though in my mind, I feel like I'm not doing a lot. And a lot of us kind of have that same thought process. So think about what would happen, like if you didn't do your job, or if your team didn't exist, like what problems would that present? That'll really kind of help you put everything into perspective a little bit more. And then as far as like managers and senior leadership, I'm also going to group in L6 and like L6, L7, like those staff and principal level engineers, because even though they're not managers, like they don't have the people management piece, they're still the equivalent of their individual contributor equivalent of these types of levels. So they're still looking for similar things. And again, this goes a lot into the difference between L6, L5, but basically like being able to do all the things above, but really like diving deep, earning trust, hire and develop the best. And same thing, like with those L6, L7, you really have like those duties in terms of mentorship and always raising the bar and really driving, being a driver of processes. So not just handing things off, but really showing ownership. Like I've seen so many people in manager positions where it's like they don't know how to pretty much like delegate, and then they don't know when like to be hands on, like especially in terms of like HR issues. Like instead of like trying to prevent these things having to be escalated to HR, they just go straight to HR. It's like, okay, well, what steps could you have done? Like, did you have like one-on-ones? Did you try to understand, what issues this person was having? Did you set clear goals and expectations for this person, like to be successful? So things of that nature, like that's kind of what they look for with that. And then some of the questions that they typically assess, kind of what I was just talking about, tell me about how you handled an underperforming employee. And I've also seen it on the flip side, like how do you handle someone that's a top performer, but you don't have any like positions open above, like to help them get promoted? Like how do you keep them from jumping ship and going to another company?